Mr. Langford, please listen, I didn't take it. Don't lie to me, Grace. I trusted you in my home. The chandelier's light trembled as wind pressed against the tall windows. In the wide parlor of his Ohio estate, Richard Langford, silver-haired billionaire and local benefactor, stood glaring at his maid. Grace Henderson, early 50s, dignified posture despite trembling hands, clutched her apron, eyes wide with disbelief. She'd worked for him 7 years, never late, never careless, yet now, he pointed at the open safe across the room, its door ajar, its velvet tray empty. $5,000, he said, voice cracking. Gone. I never even touched your safe, sir. You know that. Her voice echoed through the marble hall. Somewhere, the grandfather clock struck noon. I know what I saw, Richard snapped. You were the only one in this room yesterday. Grace's throat tightened. The sound of the rain outside was steady, like a slow accusation. Sir, please, my grandson's graduation is next week. I can't lose this job. Richard turned away, jaw set. The thunder rolled. You're finished here, Grace. Collect your things. The words landed like stones. She stood frozen, blinking back tears she wouldn't let fall. Her shoes squeaked faintly on the polished floor as she left the room, leaving the smell of lemon polish and old wood behind. The camera of life, if there'd been one, might have followed her trembling, hand brushing the family portrait as she passed. Richard's late wife, smiling beside him, holding a baby now grown. The portrait light flickered. Outside, Grace stepped into the gray afternoon. Her old sedan coughed before it started. She gripped the steering wheel, whispering, Lord, you see me. Back inside, Richard poured a drink. He didn't finish. His reflection in the glass looked older than the man the town saw on magazine covers. Security footage, he muttered, calling out, Carl, bring me the footage from yesterday. His assistant hurried in with a tablet. Minutes later, the screen played grainy video. Grace dusting the parlor, pausing by the safe. She turned, startled. Something off screen. Flashed, maybe light, maybe shadow. Then the recording skipped. The door stood open, the tray empty. That's enough, Richard said. His voice shook, but pride covered it. Delete it. I don't want anyone knowing. Carl hesitated. Sir, maybe we should, I said. Delete it. When the door closed, the house fell silent again, except for the clock ticking toward 1. Richard's hand rested on the mantel. His wife's photo smiled up at him. You'd tell me I'm wrong, wouldn't you, Helen? He whispered. Lightning flashed, washing his face in white light. Outside, Grace parked in front of her small clapboard house on Maple Street. The mailbox leaned, paint flaking. Inside, her grandson Marcus sat at the table, surrounded by textbooks. Nana, you okay? He asked. She forced a smile. Just a long day, but her hand shook as she unfolded her apron. Inside one pocket of folded paper she didn't remember putting there. She opened it slowly, a handwritten note. Just 3 words, for what's fair. Her breath caught. Who would have put it there? Before she could think, a soft knock sounded at the door. She turned toward the sound, hesitant, frightened, and the frame cut to black. Enjoying this? Tap subscribe for tomorrow's story. The morning after her dismissal, Grace Henderson sat at her small kitchen table, in the pale light seeping through lace curtains. The note from her apron lay beside a chipped teacup. The words for what's fair were, still a mystery, written in unfamiliar cursive. She traced them with her finger, as though touch might reveal the truth. Across the table, Marcus, 17 and Brit-tied, watched his grandmother carefully. Nana, he said, you didn't do what he said you did. Everyone knows you wouldn't. Grace smiled faintly. Sometimes knowing the truth isn't enough. Baby, not when the man with the power doesn't believe it. Marcus looked toward the calendar tacked on the wall. His graduation date circled in blue ink. I'll get a job. The diner's hiring. You'll stay in school, she replied, firm but gentle. You're going to make it out of Maple Street with your head high. The conviction in her voice steadied her own trembling heart. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked, a sound that filled the silence between them. The town that watched by noon. The rumor had spread through the small Ohio town like smoke in a dry field. The Henderson woman fired from the Langford mansion for stealing. People whispered at the hardware store, the church steps, the post office. Grace kept walking with her head up, but each step felt heavier. At the grocery store, a familiar voice stopped her in the bread aisle. Grace. Honey, said Evelyn, her longtime friend. Tell me it's not true what they're saying. Grace folded her hands around her shopping list. You know me better than that, Evelyn. I do, Evelyn said softly. But, you know how folks are. Once a story starts, it don't stop easy. Grace nodded, eyes glistening. Then I'll just have to outlast it. As she reached the register, she realized her hands were shaking again. The cashier, a teenage boy she'd known since he was little, didn't meet her eyes. Meanwhile, at the mansion at the far end of town, the Langford estate looked untouched by scandal. But inside, the quiet was different now and Richard Langford sat in his home office, staring at his late wife's portrait. Helen's eyes, forever kind, seemed to judge him from the canvas. His assistant Carl entered, holding a thick envelope. Sir, the housekeeper agency sent a few new candidates. Richard waved it off. Not now. Carl hesitated. The board meeting's tomorrow. The foundation wants your speech about integrity and local jobs. Integrity, Richard repeated with a bitter laugh. What a word. He looked out the window toward the road that led through town, past the old church, down to Maple Street. For the first time in years, he wondered what people were saying about him. A whisper of doubt that evening, as dusk turned the fields gold. Richard opened the safe again, empty, except for paper steeds, his will, and one family photograph. He shut the door gently. The click echoing dot. The echo seemed to whisper, "You were wrong." He shook his head, poured himself another drink, and turned on the television. The local news was running a segment on the Langford Foundation's annual gala, praising his donations to schools and hospitals. His face filled the screen, smiling among ribbons and speeches. He muted the sound. For a moment, he imagined Grace watching the same news, maybe sitting on that worn sofa in her small house. The thought twisted something inside him he didn't want to name. Grace's decision 3 days later. Grace put on her best dress and walked to the First Baptist Church, where the pastor let her use the copier for job applications. She wrote neatly, line by line: laundry attendant, school custodian, nursing home aide. Grace, the pastor said gently, "You want me to speak to Mr. Langford? I know him from the town council." She shook her head. "Thank you, Reverend, but this is between me and God now." When she stepped outside, the spring air smelled of rain and lilac. On the sidewalk, a little girl selling lemonade waved. Grace smiled, handed over $1, and took a paper cup. For the first time all week, she felt the world might still hold kindness. In her purse, the folded note pressed against her wallet. For what's fair, she couldn't shake the feeling it meant something she hadn't yet understood. The spark that night. Marcus came home excited. "Nana, I found something." He laid a tablet on the table, an old model he'd borrowed from school. The Langford Foundation has a website, and they post charity receipts online. Look, on the screen was a list of donations, including a recent $5,000 cash withdrawal marked pending verification. Grace frowned. That's the same amount he said was missing. Exactly, Marcus said. Maybe it wasn't stolen at all. Maybe someone moved it for the foundation. Grace's breath caught. "Marcus, don't go digging where we don't belong." But the spark was there now, a quiet flame of hope and fear mixed. The call late that night. The phone rang. Grace hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Henderson," a voice asked. "This is Detective Alan Morris, Maple County Police. Mr. Langford asked that we close the theft report. He won't be pressing charges." Grace exhaled slowly. "So, I'm cleared." "Not exactly, ma'am. There wasn't enough evidence either way. Cases just closed." "Thank you, officer." She hung up, staring at the receiver. It wasn't justice, but it was a beginning. In the distance. Thunder rumbled again. The ending note up at the mansion. Richard stood by the window, phone in hand. He'd made the call himself. For reasons he couldn't explain, it didn't feel like relief. He looked at the old family portrait again and whispered, "You'd tell me to make it right, Helen. But how?" Down on Maple Street, Grace folded her hands in prayer. "If truth wants to be found," she murmured, "then let it come." Outside, the same wind that moved through the Langford estate brushed her curtains. Somewhere between those two houses, one grand, one humble something unseen, had begun to shift. The spring days grew longer, but the air in Maple Grove, Ohio, stayed heavy with talk. It wasn't just gossip anymore, it was opinion, hard and fast. People took sides. Some said the billionaire had every right to protect his wealth. Others whispered that Grace Henderson had always been too proud, acting like she's better than her job. At the diner near Main Street, the clink of coffee cups carried their voices. "Grace always seemed honest," the waitress said quietly. A man at the counter snorted. "Folks can fool you. Money makes saints stumble." The conversation drifted, but Grace's name lingered like perfume that wouldn't fade. Marcus's discovery at home. Marcus scrolled through news articles on the old tablet. Most were about the Langford Foundation, but one headline caught his eye. "Langford pledges $5,000 for school. Renovation donation missing from record." He frowned. The date matched the day Grace had been fired. Beneath the article, a comment read, "Maybe the donation never existed." Marcus's mind raced. For what's fair, the note in Grace's pocket, it had to mean something more than coincidence. When he told her, Grace's face tightened. "Marcus, I don't want you near that man's business. Let it be." "But Nana, if the money was never stolen," she raised a hand. "Enough. Some truths bring more pain than peace." Her voice cracked on the last word. At the Langford estate, Richard Langford sat in his study, flipping through letters of gratitude from schools and hospitals. They used to make him proud. Now, every thank you felt like a question he couldn't answer. His foundation manager, Laura Trent, entered with a clipboard. "Richard, the press wants a comment about your last donation." He barely looked up. "Tell them everything's accounted for." "Except it isn't," Laura said carefully. "The $5,000 transfer you authorized, it's still unv. The accountant says it was withdrawn in cash." Richard's brow furrowed. "I took it out myself." She blinked. "You withdrew it?" "Yes, for the school project. I wanted to hand it personally." Laura hesitated. Then, where did it go? Richard didn't answer. His memory of that day blurred. He'd been distracted, arguing with Carl about the new security cameras. He thought he'd placed the envelope in the safe, but now he wasn't certain. For a moment, he felt a cold wave of doubt. He brushed it aside. Check again, he said. There must be an error. Grace's faith, tested on Sunday morning, Grace walked to church as sunlight spilled across the quiet street. Her neighbors greeted her politely, some with pity, some with distance. During the sermon, Pastor Reynolds spoke about forgiveness. Sometimes, he said, we must forgive before the truth arrives. That's the only way we stay whole. Grace bowed her head. She wanted to believe that. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look on Richard Langford's face, the certainty that she was guilty. After the service, Evelyn approached. Grace, I heard the foundation's hosting a town event next week. Maybe you should go. Grace shook her head. I wouldn't be welcome. You might be surprised, Evelyn said softly. People forget wrongs faster than they forget kindness. Grace smiled sadly. Maybe for some people. A newspaper headline 3 days later. The Maple Grove Chronicle ran a small piece on page 2. Langford Foundation to announce new community project. The article mentioned an open house at the Estate Inn event meant to restore trust and connection with the people of Maple Grove. When Marcus saw it, his heart leaped. Nana, you have to go. I don't belong there anymore, she said quietly. You do, if the truth does, he insisted. She didn't answer. But later that night, when the wind hummed through the open window, she looked again at the folded note, those same 3 words, and something in her heart whispered go. The open house, the following Saturday. Cars lined the gravel drive of the Langford estate. Tents, tables, and banners fluttered across the manicured lawn. Townspeople mingled, shaking hands, eating pastries catered from the diner that once whispered her name. Grace arrived quietly, wearing her best lavender dress. Heads turned, conversations hushed. Grace, Evelyn whispered. You came. I just want to listen. Grace replied. At the podium, Richard Langford stepped forward, microphone in hand. His gray suit gleamed under the spring sun. Friends, he began, thank you for joining me. The Langford Foundation exists because I believe in this town and in honesty. A murmur rippled through the crowd at that last word. He felt it. His hand trembled slightly, but he pressed on. We're launching a scholarship for underprivileged youth, beginning with a donation of. He stopped. Laura Trent leaned toward him, whispering urgently. His expression froze. The donation record, she murmured. It's not showing. He swallowed hard, beginning with, a pledge to support our future. He forced a smile, but his confidence had cracked. From the crowd, Marcus whispered. He doesn't even have it. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. Hush, now. A chance encounter after the speeches, Richard mingled with guests. When he turned, he froze. Grace stood near the lemonade table, calm and still. For a moment, no one moved. Mrs. Henderson, he said finally, voice low. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be, she replied. He looked away. I wanted you to know. I closed the case. I know, she said. But a closed case isn't the same as a clean heart. Her words struck deeper than she intended. His jaw tightened. I did what was necessary. Grace nodded slowly. Sometimes, necessary isn't the same as right. The silence between them was thick, filled only by the sound of the wind catching the tent flaps. Then, gently, she reached into her purse and held up the folded note. This was in my apron that day. I thought you might want to see it. He took it, frowning. For what's fair? I don't know who wrote it, she said, but maybe it was meant for you as much as for me. Their eyes met as filled with questions he wasn't ready to ask. Cracks in the armor that night, after everyone left, Richard sat alone in his study. The note lay on his desk beside his wife's photograph. For what's fair, he turned it over. The handwriting stirred something faintly familiar, but he couldn't place it. Carl entered quietly. Sir, there's something strange. I checked the office logs. The day of the withdrawal you never signed the final receipt. Richard looked up sharply. What are you saying? I think someone else accessed the funds before you. A chill moved through the room. Richard stood, suddenly, uneasy. Who? Carl hesitated. I don't know yet, sir, but it might not have been Mrs. Henderson. The grandfather clock chimed 9. Outside, the wind rose again, whispering through the trees that lined the drive. And for the first time, Richard Langford began to wonder if the thief he'd condemned might never have been a thief at all. The Monday after the open house, Maple Grove woke to a sky like brushed steel and a fresh layer of opinion. By noon, the town Facebook page hummed photos of the Langford tents, captions about pastries, and one blurry shot of Grace Henderson handing a note to Richard Langford. No one knew what the note said, but the image told a story. People were eager to finish for themselves. At Maple Grove High, seniors rehearsed for graduation beneath a banner that hung slightly crooked. Marcus tried to focus on his speech draft, but his eyes kept slipping to the old tablet. Every refresh brought new comments. She stood there like a queen. He looked nervous. Maybe the money never existed at all. A tap on his desk startled him. Principal Hayes stood there, tie loosened, a gentle concern in his face. Marcus, may I see you a moment? They stepped into the hall. where the floor wax smelled sharply of lemons. I heard about your grandmother, Hayes said. If you need time, I'm okay, sir. Hayes nodded. I remember when she cleaned our classrooms. She took pride in it. Pride is a kind of truth. Barkis swallowed. I know. A meeting neither wanted that afternoon. Richard Langford walked the polished corridor of the Maple Grove Community Center. On his way to a meeting with the school board about the scholarship launch, his reflection hovered in each glass. Case-old trophies, faces of teams long graduated. He felt like a visitor in a town he claimed to love. At the doorway, he stopped. Inside, a dozen townspeople waited, board members, the superintendent, a few parents, and at the far end of the table, quietly holding a worn folder, sat Grace. Richard's step faltered. Laura Trent leaned in, whispering, she volunteers on the parent committee for the seniors. Richard, she's here for logistics. Not anything else? Grace rose slightly as he entered, offering no more than a nod. He returned it, the distance between them a hallway of unspoken words. The clock on the wall ticked, loud enough to mark each second like a decision. Superintendent Cole cleared his throat. Thank you all. Before we discuss the scholarship rollout, I want to acknowledge the town's temperature. Transparency matters. Mr. Langford, Richard clasped his hands, forcing steadiness. The Langford Foundation remains committed to Maple Grove. The scholarship stands. If there was confusion about a cash transfer, it will be resolved. A parent raised her hand. Was it stolen? Richard's jaw tightened. The matter is closed. Across the table, Grace's fingers smoothed the edge of her folder. She said nothing, but the simple act drew eyes. The steady calm of someone who had survived a storm and now faced the tide. The public witness, they turned to logistics. Press release drafts. A tentative date, a request. Could the announcement be made at graduation, in front of the town? Richard hesitated. Public commitments were armor, but they were also promises. Yes, he said. If the board agrees, they did. As the meeting wound down, Superintendent Cole said, one more item. The school's security grant application requires community oversight. The board asked Mrs. Henderson to chair. He glanced toward Grace. She's accepted. A murmur moved around the room. Richard met Grace's eyes. You'll oversee the school's cameras, he asked. I'll help ensure fairness, she replied. Voice.com. The words dropped between them. Waited. Fairness. The notes ink seemed to rise in his mind again. For what's fair? And for a moment, he stood on unsteady ground. A quiet corridor when the others dispersed. Richard lingered, then approached the long table's end. Grace gathered her things with practiced hands. Mrs. Henderson, he said softly, why attend the meeting? Why take that role? So I can look this town in the eye, she answered, and not swallow truth to keep the peace. He winced. You think I asked you to swallow it? You didn't ask, Grace said gently. You issued a verdict. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere, outside, a lawnmower buzzed. Steady and indifferent. I closed the police file, he said, almost pleading, and left the door open in people's minds. She replied, that's where names get stolen. A long pause. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the folded note she'd given him, and set it on the table. Whose handwriting is this? Grace studied it again. I don't know, but you do, Mr. Langford. Or you almost do. I saw it in your face. He held her gaze. Something complicated moved through his eyes. Memory, resistance, a thin thread of fear. I'll find out, he said. I hope you do, Grace answered. For both our sakes, seeds in the open word of the meeting drifted out the community center like the scent of fresh-cut grass. By evening, the diner chatter had a new refrain. Grace chairing oversight. The scholarship announcement at graduation. The billionaire's face looking older. At her kitchen table, Grace sorted recipe cards for the senior bake sale. Evelyn stopped by with a pie she promised was just practice. They laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it sounded like laughter. Going to graduation? Evelyn asked. Wouldn't miss it, Grace said. Not for the world. She didn't mention the flutter beneath her ribs when she thought of Richard standing at a microphone on that stage. Truth had a way of arriving at ceremonies. The mansion at dusk that night. Richard stood before the open safe. The house was quiet, lights low, the grandfather clock pacing time in calm steps. He set the note on the velvet tray where the cash had once rested. The pen strokes curved with certainty and assured, looping hand. He had seen that script 1,000 times. On sticky notes in the kitchen, on tags taped to charity boxers, on the corner of grocery lists with 3 extra apples circled and a heart drawn nearby. His late wife Helen. He sank onto the leather chair, breath catching. Could it be Helen's handwriting? But Helen was gone. He closed his eyes and felt again the night before her last hospital stay. Her gentle insistence that the town would be fine without grand gestures if people looked out for each other in small, exact ways. For what's fair, a memory lit. A shoebox Helen once kept labeled for what's fair. Inside had been cash and receipts for neighbors in sudden need, rent shortfalls, broken water heaters, band trips. They'd argued over it, the way couples argue over good intentions and tidy books. She'd said, let truth be human before it's documented. Richard. He stood abruptly, heart pounding. If Helen's script was on that note, someone had learned from her, or someone had reached for the same spirits inside his house. He turned the dial, closed the safe carefully, and pressed his palm to the cool door. The click sounded like a promise. The crowd in the Lins 2 days before graduation. A scheduling conflict placed the scholarship press. Preview on the school's front steps and impromptu stage of brick and sun. The town gathered, drawn by curiosity. Richard stepped to the microphone. Laura at his side. Carl hovering near the back with a tablet. Grace stood among parents, not hiding, not demanding, steady, present. Marcus held the old tablet at chest level. Recording Maple Grove, Richard began. I've promised a scholarship. I also promised myself I would stand here certain. Certainty requires proof. The crowd stilled. A breeze lifted the edge of the banner. I cannot, yet, account for a cash transfer I authorized, he continued. I believed it was stolen from my safe. I fired someone I respected. Today, I will not accept applause until I accept responsibility. A murmur rose, surprised, wary, some grateful. Grace's throat tightened. The words were not an apology, not yet, but they were a door. From the crowd, a voice called, so who took it? Richard didn't flinch. We will find out. He nodded toward the superintendent. The scholarship will be announced at graduation. The amount will match our promise. Verified. If I have to fund it twice to keep this town's trust, I will. The crowd stirred against some claps, some whispers. A public stance carried weight. It also made enemies of pride. As the superintendent stepped forward to close the event. A small commotion rippled by the side steps. Carl had raised his hand, face pale. Sir, he said quietly, but the microphone caught it. We found something in the archives room. From Mrs. Langford's files, the words reached the amplifier, then scattered across the bricks like coins. Heads turned, cameras lifted. Richard's spine straightened. Grace's hands tightened around her purse. Bring it, Richard said. Carl threaded through the crowd, carrying a slim metal box, the kind that held index cards. A paper tag dangled from the latch, yellowed, handwritten for what's fair, safe notes. The tag's script matched the note in Richard's pocket. A hush fell so complete it seemed even the birds paused. Richard looked at Grace. She met his eyes. Calm, but not unfeeling. He set the box on the podium's shelf. The latch clicked open with a soft, undeniable sound. Inside, neatly stacked index cards with names, dates, amounts, and brief reasons: rent while husband laid off, wheelchair ramp wood, band uniform, no parent should be ashamed. Some cards had signatures. Others had a delicate note: verify with church, no publicity. At the bottom lay an envelope stamped by the foundation a few months earlier. On the flap, the same looping hand, cash held in safe for discretion. For what's fair, Richard's breath left him. He lifted the envelope, turned it over, empty. He faced the town. Then he turned, slowly, toward Grace. I think we've been looking at this wrong, he said, voice steadying. And I think the person who can help us look right is standing with us. He gestured to Grace. All eyes swung to her. She stepped forward, unsure, dignified. The microphone waited. The town waited. Richard waited, head bowed, as if in a small, human prayer. Grace set her purse down, placed her fingertips on the podium, and inhaled. Let me tell you, she said, how Helen Langford kept her promises. The crowd leaned in as if one body. The microphone hissed slightly before Grace Henderson spoke. The wind lifted the corner of her lavender shawl, sunlight glinting off the metal box beside her. I didn't know Mrs. Langford well, she began, voice steady, but I knew her ways. She saw people. When she sent me home early last winter, she pressed grocery money into my hand and said, don't call it charity, Grace, call it fairness. A murmur moved through the crowd, soft, reverent. Richard Langford stood a few steps away, hands clasped behind his back, eyes on the ground. Grace went on. What you found in that box, Mr. Langford, that was your wife's kindness. Every card in there, it's someone she helped without making them feel small. That money wasn't missing, it was waiting to be given. From the front row, Superintendent Cole asked gently, do you know who it was meant for? Grace nodded. I think she'd promised help to a few families whose kids might not finish school without it. She didn't tell me names, but she mentioned Marcus's friend, Tyler. His mom lost her job at the plant. She said, we'll make it fair for them. Marcus, standing in the back with his tablet recording, blinked rapidly. His hand tightened on the device, pride and awe tangled in his chest. The moment of reckoning, the air had changed. It wasn't accusation, now it was truth finding its way home. Richard lifted his head. The sharpness in his expression was gone. Only grief and gratitude remained. He took the microphone slowly. Helen used to tell me, he said quietly, that wealth means nothing if it can't bend toward mercy. I thought I'd honored that. But when I saw an empty tray, I saw only loss. Not her intent, not her handwriting. And I let my fear speak louder than reason. The crowd was utterly silent. He turned toward Grace. Mrs. Henderson, I wronged you. I fired you in front of others, accused you of stealing something that wasn't mine to keep. I can't take that back, but I can set it right. Grace's lips trembled, though her voice stayed composed. Sometimes, setting it right is just believing people when they tell you who they are. He nodded. Then believe me when I say I'm sorry. Applause began softly, a ripple that grew into steady clapping. The sound rolled down the school steps and across the lawn. Grace's eyes glistened. The record restored later that afternoon. In the school office, Richard sat beside Laura, Trent, and Carl, examining the contents of the metal box under bright fluorescent light. Each card represented a debt Helen had quietly settled. Each dollar accounted for generosity, not theft. Carl pointed to a notation near the bottom. Final balance, $5,000 safe. Laura exhaled, so she moved it herself. Before the records updated, Richard leaned back. She trusted me to remember, but I didn't. He closed his eyes briefly. I turned her mercy into suspicion. Carl cleared his throat. Sir, should we issue a statement? Richard opened his eyes. No, we'll issue a scholarship to every student on these cards, and then some. That'll speak louder. A quiet conversation that evening. Grace sat on her porch, sipping tea while fireflies sparked over the grass. The screen door creaked. Marcus stepped out, tablet under his arm. They're already posting about it, he said. Everyone's calling you brave. Grace smiled faintly. Bravery is just truth without armor. Baby, it doesn't always feel good. A car pulled up to the Kirkpatrick's black sedan. He stepped out. No entourage, no pretense. The man who'd once towered behind gates now stood small and sincere at the edge of her yard. Mrs. Henderson. He called softly. May I? She nodded. He climbed the steps and sat beside her. The silence between them was almost peaceful. I read Helen's notes, he said. She trusted you more than I ever did. I'm sorry for how little I saw. Grace looked at him, the porch light reflecting in her eyes. Sometimes it takes losing something to see what's still left. He nodded, voice low. I'd like you to come back, not as staff. As director of Helen's program, paid, full authority. For what's fair deserves someone who knows fairness. Grace blinked. That's a mighty offer. It's the least I owe, he said simply. The cicadas buzzed in the warm dusk. She smiled, tired and gracious. Then maybe something good can come out of all this. Mr. Langford. Richard, he corrected softly. Please. They sat in companionable silence as the night deepened around them. Rumors transformed by midweek. The story had turned again this time, toward redemption. Local news outlets covered the discovery of Helen Langford's secret charity fund. Photos showed Richard and Grace shaking hands at the school auditorium, both smiling through weary eyes. Headlines read, Fired Maid named program director after Foundation's truth uncovered. For What's Fair, initiative to aid dozens of families. Even the diner regulars spoke differently now. Guess that Grace lady had more dignity than the rest of us put together. One man said, guess the billionaire did too. Finally, another added, the new beginning, the following Friday. In the Langford mansion, the safe door hung open once more, not from suspicion but invitation. Inside rested a fresh ledger and a simple wooden plaque engraved with Helen's favorite words. For What's Fair. Grace stood beside Richard as they placed the plaque in its new spot. The room smelled of lemon polish and faint lilac from a vase she'd brought. This time, she said, let's make sure the next person knows where every penny goes. Richard smiled. Transparency, the one word I never used enough. They closed the safe together, the metallic click ringing like an ending or, perhaps a beginning. Outside, evening light stretched across the estate lawn, touching the town below. The same light spilled over Maple Street, where Marcus practiced his graduation speech aloud, his voice proud and clear. Fairness isn't just giving, it's seeing. My grandmother taught me that, and someone powerful finally listened. Grace listened from the doorway, tears glimmering but her posture unbowed. The sound of applause from the rehearsal drifted all the way to the Langford house on the hill. 3 months later, 7:42 a.m. dawn laid a pale ribbon over the Langford estate. The house, once a stage for suspicion, breathed quieter now. The For What's Fair program had helped 3 families bridge rent, 2 students cover band fees, and 1 grandfather fix a leaky roof before winter. The town had leaned in, cautiously hopeful. In his study, Richard Langford turned the safe's dial with slow, careful clicks. He'd grown ritual around the act. No more quick assumptions. He logged every deposit and every grant, double-signed with Grace Henderson. Today, he meant to file a month-end ledger. Instead, his finger caught on a lip of metal along the safe's interior wall. It flexed just slightly like a tab not meant to be noticed. He frowned. No, surely not. He pressed. The panel released with a soft sigh of felt against steel. Behind it, a narrow, hidden compartment. A small envelope waited in the slot, sealed with a dab of old red wax. On its face, in the looping hand, he now knew by heart, were the words, For What's Fair. Final instructions to be opened only if trust breaks. His breath left him. He carried the envelope to the desk as if it weighed far more than paper. The room held its own breath, lemon polish, the clock's gentle steps. Morning light pooling over oak. He sat, stared, then broke the seal. Inside lay 2 things, a signed letter, dated 1 year before Helen's passing. A second, smaller envelope marked Grace H. in the same hand. Richard read the letter first, lips moving silently. Richard, if you are reading this, something in the chain of trust has cracked. Please don't be angry. You are a good man. Pride sometimes outruns you. I have learned fairness is a living thing. It needs a keeper with soft hands and a steel spine. If ever rumor or fear hurts someone, we should protect. I ask that you honor my wish. Make Grace Henderson steward of For What's Fair. Give her authority to approve grants up to $10,000 without asking you, so long as records are kept discreetly. If she refuses, place it with her in name and find someone she trusts to assist. This is not against you. It is with you. You taught me how to build the safe. I teach you what it is for. With love, H. At the bottom. A neat line of ink, witnessed and notarized. With a faint raised seal, Richard stared at the room. Empty except for memory. Grace. Steward authority. He read the words again, as if they might turn back into love letters and not instructions that unseated him. From the center of his own giving, he picked up the second envelope. Grace H. His hands were steady now. He didn't open it. Grace's porch was already warm with the July morning. Wind shifted the chimes. Somewhere, a mower droned. Marcus, now working weekends at the hardware store before starting community college in August, had left early with a lunch pail. Richard climbed the steps and stopped at the screen door. Grace, he called, voice softer than greeting, harder than apology. It's Richard. C met him at the door, wiping her hands on a tea towel. Is something wrong? I found a hidden compartment, he said, in the safe. Her eyes lifted, careful and curious. Go on. He set both envelopes on her table. One for me, one for you. From Helen. Grace's fingers hovered above the smaller envelope, then settled. She wrote me, so, it seems. Did you read it? She asked. It's sealed. He said, it's yours. Grace slid a thumbnail under the flap and unfolded the single page. She read quietly, lips parting once, then closed. When she finished, she looked at him with a kind of stunned tenderness that wasn't pity. What did she say? He asked. She asked me to remind you of yourself, Grace said softly, and to accept something I never expected. Richard waited. She asked me to take stewardship, Grace said, almost a whisper, just like your letter. She wrote that fairness was my habit, that I see faces, not lines on a ledger. The porch held still. Only the chimes spoke. She put specifics. He managed. 10,000 without asking. Grace answered, embarrassed by the number. Records discretion. Richard exhaled, something between a laugh and a prayer. She knew us both too well. Grace folded the letter sharply, a sign of respect. What will you do, Richard? He met her eyes. Honor her. The boardroom 2 days later. The Langford Foundation board gathered around the long walnut table. Framed photos of ribbon cuttings and playgrounds watched from the walls. Laura, Carl, Superintendent Cole, and 3 board members settled with legal pads and cool water. Richard placed Helen's letter in the center. It's witnessed and notarized, he said. We are bound by her intent. Laura scanned it, eyebrows arcing, mouth soft. This holds, legally and morally, she said. I'll have counsel confirm the bylaw clause for donor directives. It holds, came a voice from the door. They turned. Attorney Maya Dalton, gray streak at her temple, crisp suit, stepped in with a thin folder. I reviewed the founding documents, she said. Mrs. Langford retained a donor intent provision for specific programs. If her letter is valid and it is, we must execute. She set down her own copy. Grace Henderson becomes steward of For What's Fair, independent signatory, budget authority as specified. Annual audit. A beat of silence followed a breath before new gravity. One board member cleared his throat. With respect, Mrs. Henderson was employed as Richard raised a hand. Stop there. She is the person my wife chose, and the person I wronged. This is not a demotion for any of us. It is an elevation of trust. Grace, seated near the end, watched the room with quiet eyes. I accept the stewardship, she said, if we agree to 3 things. Maya gestured. Name them. First, Grace said, no one's dignity gets put on a stage. We help quietly. We confirm need without making anyone plead under bright lights. She nodded toward the window. The school fields beyond. That's how Helen did it. Second, records are exact. Every penny's trail is clear to auditors, if not to crowds. Third, we make sure the people who need help know how to reach it. Churches, school counselors, the diner, the library. Anyone can carry a single-page form. No internet hoops. Laura's pen moved fast, relief visible across her face. Agreed, she said. Cole smiled. We'll distribute forms by Friday. Fourth, Grace added, then caught herself with a small laugh. I said 3. Forgive me. Say it. Richard encouraged. Grace looked at him evenly. Fourth, Richard signs the first grant with me. He nodded, throat tight. Gladly. Immediate ripples by afternoon. The town knew, not through a press blast or a shiny photo, but by the old, efficient network of Maple Grove. A tweet from the library. A notice taped to church doors. A form clipped to the diner corkboard between a babysitter flyer and a yard sale arrow. At the diner. A woman in scrubs traced the words For What's Fair. Emergency grant request with a trembling finger. You think this is real? She asked the waitress. It's Grace's, the waitress said. That's as real as bread. At the hardware store, Marcus watched a teenager in a marching band hoodie take a form and tuck it into a backpack like a ticket out of something heavy. Quiet power. Loud reaction. Not everyone smiled. A column in the Maple Grove Chronicle chided private benevolence and asked if the program was picking winners. The town Facebook page debated in long threads that wandered and returned like geese. Richard, read it all. Let it wash through, then set his phone face down. Noise, he murmured. Let the work speak. That evening, he and Grace met in the study, the safe-weighted signature object of their undoing and remaking. Richard opened it, not as a guard but as a witness. They placed the first official grant request inside, then signed together at the desk. Tyler W. Gap tuition verified. Ready? He asked. Grace nodded. Ready? They logged it as the pen felt right in both their hands. The second envelope's wait. Later, as the summer light thinned, Grace sat alone at her kitchen table and unfolded her letter again. At the bottom, beneath Helen's neat instructions, a postscript had escaped Richard's notice because it was not in the copy in his envelope. It was only in hers. P.S. If Richard forgets the sound of people's smaller needs, ring the safe like a bell. Remind him it's not a vault. It's a door. Grace traced a line with her finger, smiling through tears. Ring the safe like a bell. She understood. It meant use it often enough for compassion to echo. The screen door clicked. Marcus stepped in, sweaty from work, saw her smile, and tilted his head. Good news. Better, she said, rising to set 2 plates. Right news. One more click. Back at the mansion, Richard stared at the hidden compartment he'd never noticed in all his years of certainty. He thought of the morning, of envelopes, of the way power can sit so quietly behind felt and steel that you forget it belongs to love, before it belongs to you. He closed the panel gently, pressed until the felt kissed steel and held. The safe gave a small click, clean bright, like a bell in a quiet church. He listened to the echo in his chest. It sounded like Helen's laughter. It sounded like Grace's steadiness. That it sounded, at last, like trust. The August air hung thick over Maple Grove. Cicadas whirred. Flags drooped. Every porch smelled faintly of cut grass and coffee. Inside the Langford estate, the For What's Fair program thrived, but beneath the new calm, something trembled again. Grace sat at the long oak table in Richard's study, going over the latest disbursement list. Her glasses caught the light as she read aloud. Rent relief, medical transport, school uniforms pending, verification. Richard nodded, jotting notes in the margin. He'd grown used to her, rhythm steady, precise, forgiving when he grew impatient with the details. Then Laura Trent, the foundation manager, entered with a brown envelope marked confidential audit summary. Preliminary report. Sir, she said, setting it down. There's a discrepancy. Richard frowned. How much? $2,000. He blinked. Impossible. We've logged every cent. Laura hesitated. One grant form was duplicated, same name, same signature, processed twice. Grace looked up sharply. Who's? Laura flipped the page. Tyler W., Marcus's friend. The double entry. Grace's pulse quickened. That's the student we helped first. Richard turned toward her. Maybe a clerical error. Laura shook her head. Both checks cleared through separate banks. Someone used identical paperwork. Grace reached for the file, reading fast. The second form bore a signature eerily similar to hers, but just off enough to chill her. That's not my hand, she said quietly. Someone forged me. Richard's voice dropped. Who had access to the originals? Laura swallowed. Only staff and you too. A silence gathered like thunder in the still room. Then Richard said, softly, or the bank liaison. The suspicion that cut both ways. By evening, rumors had slipped again through Maple Grove's talk circuits. Money missing, again. Too much power in one woman's hands. At the diner. Whispers grew until someone said, maybe she got comfortable with it. People change when they get a taste of control. When Marcus heard it, he stood abruptly. Say that again. The man turned, startled. Easy, kid, just talk. My grandmother saved this town's pride, Marcus said, voice shaking. Watch your words. The waitress touched his arm. Marcus, go home. Honey, don't make it worse. He left, fists tight, shame burning behind his eyes, not at them, but at how fragile truth still felt. The audit night 2 days later, Grace arrived at the mansion after dark. The windows glowed amber. A storm gathered beyond the fields. Richard met her at the door, sleeves rolled, face drawn. I want to see it for myself, she said. They went to the safe together. Inside, the ledger, folders, receipts. Grace flipped pages until her finger stopped. There, it was the duplicate. But something else glimmered faintly under the lamp's beam. A watermark. Nearly invisible. Look, she said. Richard leaned closer. That's not our stationery. Exactly. Grace lifted the page toward the light. This was printed somewhere else. A crack of thunder rolled. Richard's gaze hardened. We can trace that watermark. I'll call the supplier. Wait, Grace said. Let me check something first. She crossed to Helen's box. The one marked for what's fair, safe notes. At the bottom lay blank forms. Helen had designed herself hand-pressed paper from a small shop downtown. That watermarks from Redding and Sons prints, Grace said. They're the only ones who made these. Richard's eyes flickered. Carl used to handle stationery orders. The storm outside cracked again. Rain now. Insistent. The confession. At 9 p.m., Richard called Carl to the house. The younger man entered, drenched from rain, eyes darting. You said, urgent. Richard held up the duplicate form. Explain this. Carl's throat bobbed. Sir, it was supposed to be temporary. My sister's medical bills. I meant to repay. Grace's heart sank. Richard's face went white. Not from rage, but from heartbreak. You forged Grace's name. Carl nodded, tears mixing with rain. I thought no one would notice one small form. You'd done so much good. What's 2,000 more to fix later? Grace steadied her voice. That's how every injustice starts, son. One small form. Carl dropped his gaze. I deserve the police. Richard looked at Grace. She met his eyes. The weight of months passed between them. Accusation, forgiveness, now choice. No, she said gently. You'll repay it through service. Every Saturday, community work under the program you betrayed, and you'll learn who fairness really serves. Carl stared, disbelief fighting shame. You'd let me stay out of jail. Fairness isn't vengeance. Grace said. Richard added, it's accountability with a chance. The storm breaks outside. Rain battered the roof in sheets. Inside, Richard wrote the incident into the ledger himself. Signature crisp funds, misused, recovered through restitution. He handed the pen to Grace. She signed beneath. Transparency, she said simply. He looked at her. You've changed what this place means. Lightning flashed through the window, lighting both their faces. No, Grace said softly. Helen did that. We're just catching up. The public reckoning. 3 days later, the foundation held a press briefing. Not glamorous, just honest. Grace stood beside Richard. The ledger opened before them. We discovered misuse of funds. Richard said, we corrected it transparently. The For What's Fair program will now publish quarterly ledgers open to all. Grace added, fairness grows in sunlight. We invite any citizen to volunteer review. Reporters scribbled. One asked, Mrs. Henderson, doesn't this shake public trust? She smiled gently. Trust isn't glass. It's clay. It can be shaped again if you're willing to work it. The answer made front-page headlines the next morning. The letter remembered that night. As Richard locked the safe, he paused, then smiled. He could hear Helen's postscript echo from Grace's retelling. Ring the safe like a bell. He let the metal door fall shut with a soft, resonant chime. Grace, standing nearby, looked up. Still sounds like forgiveness. Or truth, he said. Maybe both. She replied. The hidden gift. When Grace arrived home later, Marcus waited at the table. On it lay a manila envelope. Foundation stationery. Inside was a letter of appointment. Marcus Henderson, scholarship awarded, full tuition. Tears filled her eyes. Richard didn't mention this. Marcus grinned. He said it was Helen's leftover clause. Aid the helper's kin if need arises. Grace pressed the paper to her chest. Then Helen's bell keeps ringing. A town changed. Weeks later, Maple Grove's chatter softened. People still talked. People always did, but now they said things like, that program saved my cousin's house. And if Grace can forgive, maybe I can too. At the diner, a jar labeled For What's Fair, local funds sat by the register. Quarters clinked into it all day. Sometimes, late evening, the camera of our story would pull back, from the jar to the town square, from the square to the Langford mansion, glowing gently on the hill, from the mansion to the open window of Grace's modest home, where laughter and tea, steam rose like quiet prayers. And under it all, faint but steady, the sound of a safe clicking, shut, not hoarding, not hiding, but keeping faith alive. The late summer sun rolled over Maple Grove in a slow golden sweep. The scandal had cooled into something else entirely, a lesson, whispered over fences and coffee mugs. What began as suspicion had become, somehow, an emblem of what the town could be when pride stepped aside. But for those at the heart of it, the lesson wasn't quite done. A new kind of busy at the Langford Foundation. Things no longer moved at a billionaire's pace. The rhythm was human, steadier, humbler. Grace arrived early every morning with her tea flask, unlocking the side door herself. The first hour was always the same, sunlight creeping across the tile floor, her careful handwriting logging each check-in, and Richard's quiet footsteps following moments later. He'd stopped wearing suits for these mornings, just a shirt, rolled sleeves, a notepad under his arm. Morning, Grace, he said one Tuesday, voice calm, eyes lighter. Morning, Richard, she replied, smiling. We're down to 4 open cases and 3 approved scholarships. He nodded. Good. And the new volunteer? Carl's been steady, Grace said. He's not the same man you fired. Richard's gaze softened. Neither am I. Carl's redemption downstairs. Carl was boxing donations for the community center, food, notebooks, winter jackets. Sweat streaked his temple, but he hummed softly as he worked. Grace passed by and paused. You doing all right today? She asked. He straightened, embarrassed. Trying, ma'am. Trying's the best start, she said. Just remember, the work doesn't erase what happened, but it teaches you how to stay different. He nodded, shoulders easing. I get that now. Thank you for not giving up on me. Grace smiled. Someone had to show you what fairness looks like from the inside. The board's new rule in early September, the foundation board gathered again. This time at the Maple Grove Town Hall instead of the estate. Grace sat at the center of the table, her name now engraved on a small brass placard. Program Director, for What's Fair. Richard opened the session. This program began as a secret. It became a scandal. Now it's a standard. He glanced at Grace. Mrs. Henderson has proposed a new rule, one that changes how we do everything. Grace spoke softly but clearly. Every grant request we approve must have a human story attached. No anonymous lines. We'll know the faces, the families. No one gets to stay a number. A board member frowned. Won't that slow things down? Grace smiled gently. Maybe, but fairness doesn't rush. There was a pause and then applause. Slow but genuine. The media turns human by October. The story reached national outlets. One headline read, Ohio Town Rebuilds Trust Through Maid Turn Director Program. Grace hated the word maid and print it, felt small, but she understood why they used it. It made the story travel. Still, she refused interviews that painted her as a miracle. I'm not a saint, she told one reporter kindly. I'm just someone who stayed long enough for the truth to find its breath. The quote went viral. Evening news anchors repeated it. Church sermons quoted it. Donations surged. Richard watched it unfold with quiet pride and an ache that Helen wasn't alive to see it. Marcus's farewell in a crisp morning in November. Marcus stood in front of the community center, suitcase at his feet. He was heading to Columbus for his first semester of college, the scholarship Helen's clause had granted him. Don't let city folks turn your head too quick, Grace said. Straightening his collar, he grinned. I'll try, Nana. I'll still call you every Sunday. I know you will. Richard approached, holding a small gift bag. For the dorm, he said. Just something to remind you where you came from. Marcus peeked inside a small brass keychain shaped like a safe, engraved with 3 words. For What's Fair. Thanks, Mr. Langford, Marcus said. I'll keep it close. Call me Richard, the older man said, smiling. When the bus pulled away, Grace stood beside him, eyes misty. You did that, Richard said. Your faith changed his future. Grace shook her head. No, Helen did. We're just keeping her promise alive. The audit of the heart that winter, snow-draped Maple Grove in quiet white. The foundation's new transparency report, every number, every story was posted on bulletin boards across town. For the first time in its history, not one anonymous line remained. Every act of help had a name, a purpose, a trail. One night, after the office closed, Richard lingered by the safe again. He'd stopped seeing it as a cage for wealth. Now it felt like a chapel of paper and ink. Grace stepped in behind him. Still balancing the books, she teased. Always, he said with a chuckle. Then, turning serious, do you ever think about that day I fired you? Every time I write a new approval, she said, because that's how I know what grace means. They shared a small, knowing smile, the kind that grows only from pain turned into peace. A Christmas surprisey week before Christmas, a small brown envelope appeared in the foundation's mail slot. No return address. Inside was a folded note in 5 crisp $100 bills. The note read, For What's Fair. For what you've taught us. A neighbor who learned. Grace turned it over in her hands, smiling. Looks like the town's learning to pay it forward. Richard laughed softly. Helen's echo keeps finding new voices. They added the anonymous donation to the next ledger entry, not under miscellaneous, but under Repentant Hearts Fund. Grace's idea, the night of candles on New Year's Eve, the town gathered in the park under strings of lights. The foundation had sponsored a small candlelight walk, no speeches, no press, just community. Grace stood beside Richard, the winter air crisp. Families held candles, whispering prayers of gratitude and names of those helped. Carl walked beside the youth group, holding a lantern. The little girl whose wheelchair ramp had been built last month smiled as her father pushed her through the snowy path. At midnight, the bell at the old church tolled. The sound carried across Maple Grove, over the diner, the high school, and the mansion on the hill. Grace looked at Richard. There's your bell. He smiled. No, that's yours. They watched as candles shimmered against the snow, a living ledger of light. Quiet vindication in the months that followed. The town's gossip softened into gratitude. People spoke of the Fair Fund as if it had always existed, and though both Grace and Richard knew how much it had cost to build trust again, neither spoke of it anymore. They simply lived it. Sometimes, late at night, Grace would pass the safe, now relocated to the foundation office, and rest, her hand on its cool door. She'd whisper a small prayer. Let fairness stay alive tomorrow too. And somewhere beyond the glass, in the quiet of Maple Grove, the faint hum of a world made better answered back. The new year dawned bright over Maple Grove, painting frost on every rooftop and turning even the smallest porch light into gold. 3 months had passed since the candlelight walk, and the rhythm of fairness had settled deep into the town's bones. It wasn't news anymore, it was habit. A town learning to listen. The diner that once whispered gossip now posted grant forms beside the menu. At the post office, volunteers collected envelopes for neighbors who couldn't drive. At the library, a bulletin board listed thank you notes, handwritten in blue ink. Rent saved our home. Books for the twins. Thank you, you made us feel seen. Grace read them on her way to the foundation each morning. She never corrected the ones that credited her name directly. She just smiled and whispered, "All of us did this." The townspeople had learned something quiet but radical, that dignity didn't come from avoiding mistakes, but from how you repaired them. The safe in its new home, the Langford estate, had turned one wing into a public office. The once private safe now sat against a sunlit wall, door open, lined with paper files instead of stacks of cash. Visitors came to drop off forms, receipts, or simple notes of thanks. Grace dusted it herself every Friday. She called it ringing the bell, just as Helen had written. Each time she touched the cool metal, she felt a vibration, not sound exactly, but memory, a symbol that fairness was still breathing. That morning, she found a new addition tucked inside, a child's drawing, crayon bright, of a smiling woman holding hands with a man beside a golden safe. In crooked handwriting, the caption read, "Mr. Richard and Ms. Grace keep people safe." She laughed softly, heart full. That's the best audit we'll ever have. Richard's reflection upstairs. Richard Langford stood by the same window he'd once glared from when anger ruled his mind. Now, he looked down at the visitors arriving at his house, the single mothers, retirees, and students, none of whom came to impress him. They came for help, or to give it. He turned to the photo on his desk. Helen, in her garden hat, eyes bright, hands muddy from planting. "You were right, love," he murmured. Fairness wasn't something we owned, it's something we owed. He ran a hand across the old safe key on his desk. He didn't need it anymore, but he kept it there as a reminder. Control isn't trust, and trust can't be locked away. Grace's unexpected visit that afternoon. Mayor Whitaker, a cheerful man with a fondness for second chances, stopped by the foundation office. "Grace," he said, "we've got an idea." She smiled. "That sounds dangerous, Mayor." He chuckled. "Not this time. We want to name the new youth center after Helen Langford and the library wing after you." Grace blinked, stunned. "After me? Oh no, that's too much." "It isn't," he interrupted kindly. "You gave this town its moral backbone. People need to remember how that happened." Grace hesitated, glancing at the safe. "Then call it the For What's Fair Learning Center. That's all the name it needs." The mayor grinned. "You sure?" She nodded. "If fairness is a door, I'm just the doorkeeper." Carl's apology later that week. Carl appeared at her door holding a wooden box. "Made this for you," he said shyly. Inside lay small brass plaques engraved with donors' names, each one a volunteer who'd repaid kindness with kindness. "They'll go on the community wall," he said. "Thought it'd help people see how far we've come." Grace brushed her fingers across the cool metal. "Thank you, Carl. That's real repentance when you build what you once broke." He smiled. "You taught me that." "Maybe," she said, "but you lived it." Marcus returned. Spring came early. The snow melted into green, and Marcus came home from his first semester of college, taller, older, more sure of himself. He stopped by the foundation before he even unpacked. "Hey Nana," he said, grinning. "Guess who got invited to speak at the university's community ethics panel?" Grace looked up from her desk, eyes wide. "They want you to speak." "They want us to," he said, holding up the email. "They read about the FAIR program. Said it's a case study in moral repair. They want me to tell it." Grace leaned back, overwhelmed. "Then you tell it true, every hard bit. Every humble one." Marcus nodded. "That's the only way it's worth telling." A letter from Washington. A month later, a crisp envelope arrived. Department of Community Development, Washington, D.C. Richard slid it open and handed it to Grace. It was an invitation. "The Langford Foundation has been shortlisted for the National Civic Renewal Award." Grace chuckled. Helen's bell reached all the way to the Capitol. Richard smiled. "Maybe it'll teach them something about small towns and big hearts." They agreed to attend, not for glory, but to represent what could happen when people stopped shouting and started listening. The ceremony in April. They traveled together, Grace in a modest navy dress, Richard in his simplest suit. When their foundation's name was called, Richard motioned for Grace to step forward alone. On stage, under warm lights, she spoke into the microphone. "We thought fairness came from wealth. Turns out, it comes from humility. We thought truth came from documents. Turns out, it comes from people brave enough to be wrong and start again." Applause rose, not thunderous, but heartfelt. She left the stage quietly, head bowed, eyes glistening. A return home that night. Back in Maple Grove, the town waited for them with lanterns, strung along Main Street. As their car turned the corner, people clapped and waved, nod in awe. But in kinship, Grace and Richard stepped out, laughing as children ran up to hand them flowers. A reporter asked, "What's next for the foundation?" Grace looked at Richard. He smiled and said, "Tomorrow, we start again." The safe rings once more later, in the quiet of the office. Grace placed the National Award plaque inside the safe, right beside Helen's old note. She closed the door slowly, letting it click. Richard, standing behind her, said softly, "You know, it still sounds like a bell." She nodded. "That's how I know we're not done." They stood for a moment, letting the sound linger, until it faded into silence, the kind that only comes after full circles have closed. Outside, the lights of Maple Grove shimmered like new promises. The safe sat quietly in the corner, not guarding gold, but keeping faith a simple, shining monument to what people can rebuild when they choose truth over pride and fairness over fear. 6 months later, late summer, Maple Grove, Ohio, the town had settled into a new kind of quiet. Not the uneasy hush of scandal, but the steady rhythm of contentment, the sound of people who had learned how to breathe together again. The For What's Fair program had its own small office now, next to the library, its sign hand-carved by Carl himself. The front window always held a vase of fresh flowers, a habit Grace started so no one mistakes fairness for something cold. Every week, someone new stopped by, a teacher, a factory worker, a widow from 2 streets over, not to ask for money, but to leave a story, a thank you, or sometimes just a prayer. The town that remembered to cross from the office, the new For What's Fair Learning Center, bustled with laughter and children's footsteps. Inside, Marcus led an after-school group called the Kindness Ledger, where kids logged good deeds on chalkboards the way adults once logged donations. He'd written the motto above the board himself: "Do what's right, write what you do." On weekends, he drove home from Columbus, still helping Grace with reports, still bringing her stories of city folks who wanted to copy their model. They asked if it's scalable. He joked one evening. Grace laughed. "Fairness isn't a spreadsheet, baby. It's a heartbeat. Tell them to start there." Richard's morning, each morning, Richard Langford took the same slow walk through town. Gone were the tinted car windows and distant waves. He stopped at the diner, paid in cash, and always tipped double quietly. "No fanfare, Mr. Langford," the waitress said once, handing him change. "You don't need to keep proving anything." He smiled. "I'm not proving, I'm practicing." He kept a photograph of Helen folded in his wallet, next to a slip of paper that read, in her handwriting, "Fairness keeps you honest, even when no one's watching." Sometimes he'd stop by the learning center and listen to the kids read poems about kindness. They didn't know who he was, and that suited him fine. The safe's last roll one warm, August afternoon, Grace called Richard over to the foundation office. The sunlight through the window made dust motes shimmer like gold in the air. "Richard," she said softly, "it's time." She pointed to the corner where the old Langford safe stood, polished, open, and empty. "I think it's done its work," she said. "We've got new systems, online ledgers, audits, but this deserves peace." He nodded, understanding. "What do you want to do with it?" "Move it to the museum wing," she said. "Label it the safe that set a town free. Let people touch it, feel the story in the steel." He smiled, a slow, full smile. Helen would love that. They stood together as movers arrived. When the safe was lifted, a small folded paper slid out from underneath, yellowed and brittle. Grace picked it up carefully. The handwriting was Helen's again. "If you found this, it means the work continues. Keep fairness loud, but your heart's quiet." Grace's hand trembled. She really thought of everything, she whispered. Richard's eyes glistened. "No, she just knew us." Carl's full circle that same week. Carl finished his required community service, though by then, no one was counting hours. He chose to stay on as a volunteer. He led training sessions on ethical paperwork, laughing whenever someone teased him about the irony. "Best way to learn not to trip is to mark where you fell," he'd say. When the museum display for the safe opened, Carl stood in the back, hands in pockets, watching children run fingers over the cold metal. Grace caught his eye, nodded, and mouthed, "Thank you." The town's evening light as summer turned toward dusk one Friday. Maple Grove gathered again in the park. No ceremony this time, just families, picnic blankets, and laughter. Lanterns hung from trees. The local choir sang softly. The town bell repaired, and bright chimed 7 times. Grace sat beside Richard on a bench, paper cup of lemonade in hand. "You know," she said, "this town used to think fairness came from money." He chuckled. "Now they know it comes from people." A breeze carried the smell of cut grass and lilacs. Somewhere, a child's voice shouted, "Thank you, Miss Grace." She waved, heart swelling. "I used to dread my name being said out loud," she murmured. "Now it feels like a prayer." The safe's echo later that night, as the crowd thinned and stars blinked awake, Richard looked toward the museum window across the square. The safe gleamed faintly in the lamplight, its door propped open for visitors. He could almost hear it again, that faint, musical click. Grace followed his gaze. "You hear it too, don't you?" He nodded. "Every time. It's like the sound's still traveling." She smiled. "Then we did it right." They sat in the gentle dark, neither speaking for a while. The wind brushed the trees. Somewhere, a night train hummed far away, its whistle rising and fading, a sound of distance, of journeys still going. 6 months later, a letter in January. Grace received a letter, postmarked, Seattle, Washington. It was from a small-town library director. "Dear Mrs. Henderson, we heard about your For What's Fair program. We've started one here too, modeled after yours. Our safe isn't made of steel. It's a wooden cabinet, but it holds the same kind of hope. We ring it every Friday. Thank you for lighting the way. Grace smiled, tears welling. She placed the letter inside the now empty space where the safe had once stood. The bell keeps ringing, she whispered. Final scene that evening. The camera of life would linger on her porch, the lace curtains swaying, the hum of cicadas, the warm glow spilling from inside. On the table beside her teacup lay the first note that had started it all. For what's fair? She touched it gently, as if greeting an old friend. Then she leaned back, eyes closing, peace radiating from her face. The story that began with accusation had ended in awakening, not of wealth, but of worth. And somewhere, faint but clear, the echo of the safe's click drifted through Maple Grove one last time, not as guilt, not as grief, but as grace. End. Thanks for watching.